Welcome, everyone, to my podcast. We're going to get into it. The number one skill set that you must develop, the skill of dealing with people. Welcome to another episode of Personal Growth Recipes with your host, Ron Denner. Now, I'm going to cover a subject that, in my opinion, is the number one skill set that you must develop in life, and that's the skill to deal with people. Now, this skill is going to help you grow a business, have a better marriage or family life, and get along with other people, period. Now, I don't care if you're a president of a large corporation, a pastor of a church, or a stay-at-home mother or father. Your ability to deal with people and persuade or influence them is going to determine your success and ability to lead people. In my opinion, one of the best books I've ever read and reread is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Now, there is so much wisdom in this book. I'm going to split it into 4 separate podcasts. And these next 4 podcasts are going to be as follows. Today is going to be fundamental techniques in handling people. Number 2 is 6 ways to make people like you. Number 3 is how to win people to your way of thinking. And number 4 is be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. But I want to explain why this skill will make or break most people. There was a study done by the Carnegie Institute years ago, and this study revealed 15% of your financial success is due to technical knowledge or IQ. 85% is due to personality and your ability to lead people. John Rockefeller was a famous businessman, and he said, "The ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee, and I will pay more for that ability than for any under the sun." So it kind of makes you wonder why every college would offer more courses to develop this high price ability, the highest price ability under the sun, basically. And for most of us, our people skills are on-the-job training. We literally learn on the fly. So I want to hit the pause button on that for a second and really have you tune in, hopefully, to these next podcasts dealing with this. And the wisdom I'm going to be sharing from Dale Carnegie's book is the playbook for life, more specifically for your life. So let's get started on step 1, fundamental techniques in handling people. The first principle is this: don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Let's go back in time here. On May 7th, 1931, one of the biggest manhunts New York City has ever known came to an end. After several weeks, Two Gun Crowley, a killer who didn't drink or smoke, he was trapped in his apartment in New York City, and the police were tipped off where he was and surrounded the building. They threw tear gas inside, and a gun battle took place. Eventually, Crowley waved the white flag and he surrendered to the police. Now, the police commissioner declared that they had captured one of the most dangerous criminals ever. But how did Two Gun Crowley regard himself? We know because when the police were firing into his apartment, he wrote a letter addressed to whom it may concern. And in this letter, Crowley said this: "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." And a short time before this incident, Crowley had been out on a country road with his girlfriend when a policeman approached the car. Without saying a word, Crowley cut this policeman down with a shower of lead, literally murdered him in cold blood. And when Crowley was sentenced to the electric chair, his last statement was this: "This is what I get for defending myself." And the point of the story is this: Crowley did not blame himself for anything. Another person, Al Capone, was sentenced. He told the judge, "I've spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse." Capone, he didn't condemn himself either. He regarded himself as a public benefactor. So think about this. If Two Gun Crowley and Al Capone didn't blame themselves for anything, what about the people that you and I come in contact with on a daily basis? Give that some thought. John Wanamaker, who founded a chain of retail stores, once confessed, "I learned 30 years ago that it's foolish to scold to scold people. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without worrying over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence. Pretty interesting comment. Criticism is futile because it puts the other person on the defensive and usually makes him or her strive to justify themselves. Now, criticism is dangerous because what it does is it wounds a person's precious pride. It hurts their sense of importance and just simply arouses resentment. So when you criticize you're putting the other person on the defensive. You know, Abraham Lincoln, he was one of the greatest leaders in the history of our country. After Lincoln was shot and he lay dying, the Secretary of War, a guy by the name of Stanton, said, "There lies the most perfect ruler of men that the world has ever seen." So what was the secret of Lincoln's success in dealing with people? Did he indulge in criticism of other people? Surprisingly, the answer is yes. You see, in Lincoln's earlier years, matter of fact, in the autumn of 1842, Lincoln ridiculed a politician by the name of James Shields with a letter in the local newspaper. Now, Shields, he was furious, so he tracked Lincoln down and he challenged him to a gunfight. Now, Lincoln didn't want to fight, but he could not get out of it just to save his honor, basically. So they met literally on a sandbar in the Mississippi River, prepared to fight to death. But at the last minute, their spouses interfered and they stopped the gunfight, thankfully. But that was one of the major turning points in Lincoln's life. It taught him a very invaluable lesson in the art of dealing with people. Never again did Lincoln write and deliver an insulting letter. He learned his lesson. From that time on, he almost never criticized anybody for anything. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg was fought during the first 3 days of July 1863. And during the night of July 4th, General Lee and his Southern Army had to retreat to the Potomac River. Now, the river was swollen and really impossible to cross, so Lee's army was trapped. And Lincoln ordered his general, a guy by the name of General Meade, to immediately attack Lee's forces. He had him boxed in. And if General Meade won this battle, the Civil War could really be over. But what did Meade do? He refused point blank to attack Lee. And finally, the waters receded and Lee escaped over the Potomac River with his forces. Imagine how Lincoln felt. Well, Lincoln was furious. And in bitter disappointment, Lincoln sat down and wrote Meade this letter. Here's the actual letter. "My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. Now, he was within our easy grasp, and to have closed in upon him in connection with our other late successes would have ended the war. As it is, the war is going to be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river, when you can take with you very few, no more than, say, 2/3 of the forces that you had in hand? It would be unreasonable to expect, and I do not expect, that you can now effect much. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it." So that was his letter. Now, what do you suppose Meade did when he read this letter? Well, Meade never saw the letter. You see, Lincoln never mailed it. This letter was found among Lincoln's papers after his death, and we can likely assume that Lincoln reconsidered after realizing that what if he had been in General Meade's shoes and he had been surrounded by all that blood and the screams of the wounded and dying? You know, maybe I wouldn't be so anxious to attack either. It's water under the bridge at this point. So if I send this letter, it's just going to make General Meade try to justify himself, and it's going to arouse hard feelings. It's going to impair his usefulness as a commander and perhaps literally force him to resign from the Army. So Lincoln put the letter aside, for he had learned that sharp criticism usually ends in futility. So the next time you and I are tempted to criticize someone, do this. Pull out a $5 bill out of your pocket and ask yourself this question. How would Lincoln handle this problem if he had it? I like that. Just take a $5 bill next time. Now, when dealing with people, let us remember that we're not dealing with creatures of logic. We're dealing with creatures of emotion, creatures that are bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity. So instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out what they do, why they do what they do. Now, that's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism. And it's going to breed sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. Pretty good virtues. A famous quote says, "God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man until the end of his days. Why should you and I?" So that's principle number one. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. The second principle is give honest and sincere appreciation. You know, there's only one way to get anybody to do anything. You ever stop to think about it? And that's by making the other person want to do it. Now, there's other ways, such as we could stick a revolver in their ribs and make a demand, or we could threaten our employees to fire them if they don't cooperate, or we could raise our voice at our spouse or our children. I'm sure that'll get their attention. I've done that before, probably. These attempts backfire and they simply don't work. The only way that I can get you to do anything is by giving you what you want. My only question then becomes, what do you want? The answer to that question is the desire to be important. Remember that phrase, the desire to be important. It's very, very significant, and it's a very common theme from here on out. There's a list of 7 things most people want. I'm going to give you those 7 things. Health, food, sleep, money, life in the hereafter, sexual gratification, the well-being of our children, and a feeling of importance. Now, those first 6 are usually gratified. The last one, the desire to be important, that's very elusive. It's very hard to get. Now, it's this desire to be important that led an uneducated, poverty-stricken grocery clerk to study some law books that he had found in a barrel that he bought for 50 cents. You've probably heard of this grocery clerk's name. We've already mentioned him. His name is Abraham Lincoln. Now, it was this same desire that inspired Charles Dickens to write his famous novels. It was the same desire that made Rockefeller accumulate millions that he never spent. Now, this desire makes you want to wear the latest styles and look your best when you go out. Now, for us parents, this desire makes us want to talk about our children. And on the opposite end, it's this desire that also lures many boys and girls into joining gangs, unfortunately, and getting into criminal activity. So it goes both ways. If you tell me how you get your feeling of importance, I'm going to tell you what you are, and that really determines your character. Now, that's the most significant thing about you. Charles Schwab was one of the first business people to earn over $1 million a year. When asked what his secret formula was, Schwab stated, "I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people the greatest asset that I possess, and the way to develop that the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement." Now, there's nothing that kills the ambitions of a person as much as criticism. And this is what Schwab did, but you know, what do average people do? We do the opposite. A lot of us do the opposite. You know, there was a study done several years ago on runaway wives. What do you think was discovered to be the number one reason the wives ran away? Well, it was lack of appreciation. You see, we spend about 95% of our time thinking about ourselves. And if we stop thinking about ourselves for just a little bit and begin to think of the other person's good points, this can literally shift our attention to where it needs to go. Unfortunately, and I'm guilty of this, we take for granted those closest to us. So my challenge for everyone is to say a word of appreciation and encouragement to our spouses or those that are closest to us. We need reminders, right? So be specific and sincere. Don't just say it. Flattery doesn't count. Now, it kind of reminds me of the 2 guys that were talking and how their marriages were going. And the first guy, we'll call the first guy Bob, and he said, when I got home from work last night, I looked at my wife and I told her, honey, when I look into your eyes, the hands of time stand still. Now, Bob told his friend John, now you need to compliment your wife and be specific. Now, don't copy what I do or what I said exactly. Put it into your own words. Be genuine. So, and by the way, she cooked me one of the best meals that I've ever had after that compliment. So the next night, John, he got home from work and he walked up to his wife, says, honey, your face could stop a 24-hour clock. John, you can imagine, did not get a big meal that night. He got a kind of a frying pan tossed across the room at him. Now, the moral of the story is this. So put some thought into this. Really look for the good strengths, the everyday work in the home that we do for each other. The list could go on. And always remember this. The little things are the big things. The little things are the big things. Now, let's stop thinking about our accomplishments and wants for a few seconds each day. Let's simply try to figure out the other person's good points. So, now I've discovered that there's a lot of lonely people in the world who really don't have a large circle of friends. They simply almost get no attention or appreciation. So the next time you or I meet one of these people, remember a kind word or a sincere compliment will mean the world to them. So that summarizes principle number 2, give honest and sincere appreciation. Principle number 3 is arouse in the other person an eager want. So what do we mean by that? Well, a simple analogy is that if you've ever gone fishing, now, one of my favorite foods is chocolate cake, but I don't use chocolate cake for bait when I fish. I use a worm. See, it's not what I want, it's what the worm wants. Pretty basic, right? So why not use the same common sense when fishing for people? Now, it's natural for us to talk about what we want. We're eternally interested in what we want, but no one else is. The rest of us are just like you. We're interested in what we want. So the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. Remember that tomorrow when you're trying to get somebody to do something. So before you speak, pause and just ask yourself, how can I make this person want to do it? I'll give you an example. Let's say you don't want your children to smoke. What you don't want to do is preach at them and yell at them about not smoking. Just simply show them that cigarettes may keep them from making the basketball team or winning that 100-yard dash. It's seeing it through their eyes, basically. Henry Ford has one of the best bits of advice that was ever given in this area. He said, if there's any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. Now, there's another author by the name of Stephen Covey. He wrote a great book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and his statement was this: seek first to understand, then to be understood. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I think He wants us to use them in that proportion. I've been in sales for over 30 years, and the biggest mistake that I see salespeople make, they approach it with the motto, ready, fire, aim, instead of ready, aim, fire. Now, selling is really finding a want or need and filling it. The only way to find a want or need is just to ask what they want or need. So if you get one thing from this podcast, this may prove to be one of the building blocks of your life. So what we want to do is we want to develop an increased tendency to think always in terms of other people's points of view and try to see things from their angle. It takes practice. If we're not sure what their point of view is, I would suggest ask them. I have news for the rest of you. If you think this doesn't apply to you because you're not in sales, I got a surprise. If you're married or if you're in a relationship, you're in sales. If you have children or you work with other people in any line of work, guess what? You're in sales. You see, sales is dealing with persuasion and influence. That's really what it is. For me personally, I definitely married up. The best sales job I've ever done was getting my wife to say yes. So to summarize principle number 3, arouse in the other person an eager want. And that's it, folks. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast, and I invite you to listen to next Wednesday's podcast. We go into the second series of this 4-part series. Now, next week's podcast, like I said, will be on Wednesday, 6 ways to make people like you. And if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and leave a comment down below. You can follow me on Twitter at Ron Dener. You can follow me on Instagram at DenerRon. You can please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Ron Dener. And I invite you to subscribe to Personal Growth Recipes on Apple Podcasts. And if you would please give us a 5-star rating if you've been enjoying it. And as always, like and share our Facebook page, Personal Growth Recipes. So be sure to tune in next Wednesday for my upcoming episode. And until then, folks, this is Ron Dener, your host for Personal Growth Recipes, serving up and signing off.